Good morning, students. We have just entered into third section, as I told you in the previous part, the political science, and the first lesson, the idea of democracy and its spread. Of course, we just started to learn about what democracy is, how democracy works, and then we saw an example of what really happened in the country of Libya and how the democracy flowered there. Okay, soon after the independence from Italy, Libya was a colony of Italy, and after the independence, in 1947, um, we have a re-establishment of monarchy in Libya. And what happens after the discovery of oil and the 1961, we have a kind of revolution in the country, and the army general Muhammad Gaddafi, you see here in the picture, army general, he overpowers the monarchy, and the king flees the country, and finally he establishes the rule in Libya. In the beginning, as we saw, no, as I already told you, in the beginning everything was fine, okay, and Muammar Gaddafi, actually, as a young leader, he wanted to keep up the democratic principles, because the army has just overturned the monarchy, and then they are trying to re-establish the democracy in Libya, having Muammar Gaddafi as a leader. But what happens now? Of course, Gaddafi did really well. He made education free, and he made the healthcare system free. Okay, so everything was well, and he made sure that all the people in his country, they have a house. Okay, their own house, and therefore, owning of a house, a property, is supposed to be the basic human right in Libya. It was this man who brought it. Okay, till the end he wanted to see that everyone should have a house. But what happens, as he became older and older, he suppressed all the critics. He didn't want anyone to criticize his government. And naturally, what happens when one man is ruling a country for a longer time, that one man rule becomes a kind of authoritarian rule, and he becomes a tyrant. Okay, and he is defeated in the year 2012. No, you know what happened. Then Libya undergoes a election, and then finally they re-establish democracy, but still they have a long way to go. Okay, right, just a recap of what we have seen in the previous part. Now we will move on to second country, Myanmar. The name was Burma, and how here we see the flowering of democracy. Okay, see here, uh, Myanmar is a neighboring country of our country, India. So our country shares border with Bangladesh, Myanmar, China, in the western side with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and so on. Okay, right. Now Myanmar is a very small country. Just like India, Myanmar was the colony of British England. Okay, so it was a British colony, and they have their independence on 4th January 1948. Unlike Libya, what happens in Myanmar? Okay, sorry for the discontinuity. Of course, I just situated Myanmar. Okay, right. Now, after the independence, as I told you, from Italy, sorry, from England, Britain, Myanmar first of all began with a proper election, and then they had their own democratic rule. But what happened now? Almost after some 12 years, in the year 1951, let us say, in the year 1962, something happened there. The military ruler, they took over the country. Why? Because the democratically elected government was so insufficient to rule the country. They could not rule the country. They were all very much corrupted, and therefore, making use of that situation, what happens now? The army takes over Myanmar. Why army takes over me? Why army was so powerful in Myanmar? Or why they took over the Myanmar? Because it was because of the army that they attained the independence, and therefore full and full it is the army that controls the whole of country, and therefore they took over Myanmar. Here something happens. The leader who compromised freedom from Britain, who was the father of this particular very prominent leader. You could see her picture here. Okay, so here, so her father, Aung San Suu Kyi, her father was Aung San. Okay, so he was one of the military ruler, commander. He was a bit, a leader who was very much interested in keeping up the democratic values of Myanmar, and he wanted to once again re-establish democracy after some years of military rule. But what happened? He was killed by the political ruler. Okay, now it's from here we begin the story. So we have the rule, the military rule in Myanmar, and the army took control of almost many tribal regions. Now there are so many tribals in Myanmar. The army controls almost all of the tribal regions. Then what happened? Army became so arrogant. They wanted to oppress the people, and they wanted to control all the land, all the farms. Okay, and they were oppressing the people, and then the child labor was increasing. Child labor was harshly exploited. And then what happens in the year 1988? There was a protest against the military rule by the students. This particular protest was terribly suppressed by the military command, the military government. Almost many died, and it became an international issue. So it was during this time we have the emergence of the daughter of the assassinated leader Aung San. She is Aung San Suu Kyi. Okay, now in the video I have attached a video that will tell you about the life of this particular young leader, and she was actually, she wanted to carry forward the democratic values, the conviction of her father. The military ruler, the military government did not really want her to emerge. So what happened? She was arrested. She was arrested. Then after some time she was released. Then in the year 1999 there was an election. So she had a political party. She was head of a political party called National League for Democracy, NLD. And in that election that was held after her release from the prison in the year 1990, almost her party won 80% of the seats in the election. Here is where the problem comes. The army once again intervened, because army is controlling every aspect of life in the politics of Myanmar. Now, even though she has won the election, the army did not want her to become the president. So what happened? Once again, she was jailed at this time. Then army rejected the demand for her release and did not permit her party to form a government. Okay. Then what happened after the election? After this result and so on, she was released, but she was kept under house arrest. She was not allowed to go out. Even she wasn't allowed to go out to attend her own husband's funeral. Okay, so such was the way that she was very much tortured by the government. Then what happened? Now it was this time that international community, they began interfering into the political affairs, political developments of Myanmar. They imposed all kinds of sanctions. Okay, so economic and trade sanctions were imposed upon Myanmar. So Myanmar cannot import any goods, and they cannot export any goods. So this import and export was banned, and therefore country was really struggling. So keeping that in mind, these military rulers slowly they tried to be more flexible. Okay, then again there was a re-election in the year 2008 with due to the pressure of UNO, so United Nations organizations. Then here what happened, but Suki was not allowed to contest the election. She was not allowed to go out. She was still under the house arrest. So as a protest, what happened, the NLD party, you see here, the party that she founded, NLD, National League for Democracy, this particular party boycotted the election, and even the international, so here the military backed political party, they won the election. Okay, keeping these developments in mind, the international community and the UNO, they considered this election to be invalid election. Okay, then again in the year 2011 there was a by-election. This was one of the very important election in the history of Myanmar. So in this by-election, what happened? This election was held for 45 seats, and Suki's NLD party, they won almost clean 43 seats. Okay, and finally she was released, and the NLD government, they formed the government, but she wasn't allowed to become the president. Okay, so with that we have the end of the military rule. But here what happens, still you can see in the video, here we see a strange thing, the party. Okay, so here according to their constitution, 25% of the seat will be held by the militaries. So the military will control 25% of the seat, and the rest of the 75% will be by the people. Okay, so of these 25 people, important portfolios like home ministry, okay, so home ministry and the defense, okay, so these important portfolios will be handled only by the military. So in a country, two important portfolios, they are home ministry and the defense ministry. They are the important portfolios in any democratic country. Okay, but the military controls these two portfolios. So government cannot control these two people. Okay, which means you can understand that still, even though there is a democratically elected government, but still Myanmar is still under the rule of the military from the behind. Okay, so this is how so still it is happening there. Okay, still we have the rule, so it is partial democracy and partial it is by the military command. Okay, so this is how things are happening there, and still Myanmar has a long way to go, okay, towards establishing their democracy. Okay, right, now comparing Libya and Myanmar. Now by now you would have understood, okay, what is the difference between Libya, the democracy in Libya and democracy in Myanmar. So Libya began from monarchical rule, so there's a transition from monarchy, okay, towards democracy. But what happened, that transition period from monarchy to democracy was filled with the military rule. So military wanted to help the country to establish democracy. But in that transition period, what happens, now the person who was supposed to be a democratic leader turned out to be a dictator in the person of Muammar Gaddafi. We see then how Gaddafi was defeated, and how once again there was a democratic elections, and how we see that still as a young democratic nation, Libya is trying to find its ground in democracy. Okay, but whereas in Myanmar, what we see here, just the opposite. There was a democratically elected government soon after their independence. There's a democracy, but what happens, that democracy is destroyed by the army to re-establish a pure democracy according to their point. Here what happens, now it is not the case. In the case of Libya, we have a final fulfillment, but here in case of Myanmar, no, it is just a cheat. Army becomes more and more powerful. These army leaders, they are the one who write the constitution. That is strange, that is dangerous. Imagine if an army is going to write a constitution, I'm very sure that they will never ever give any place for criticism or desertion, we say. Okay, so the fundamental needs of the people are being negated in Myanmar. Okay, in both countries we see the ruling government had the active backing of the army. So both in Libya we have the support of the army. So in the same way, in Myanmar we have the support of the army. Okay, but the rulers did not allow free and fair elections. So when army interferes into the political affairs, naturally the freedom of thought, the freedom of expression is very much negated. They are not permitted. However, Myanmar was different from Libya. So Myanmar started with the democratic government, as I told you before, but then the military took over the reins of government. In Libya, the army took over the power after abolishing the monarch. Both countries lacked the enabling conditions for a healthy democracy to flourish. And both countries were deeply divided politically, and the possibility of ruling classes working out a composite solution acceptable to all was low. They lacked the political will. There were no much options, either one single party or the army. So here there's a lack of political spirit we find in both countries, both Libya and Myanmar. The people of both nations wanted freely elected government. People really want a free elected government, democratically elected government. They wanted freedom of expression. They wanted freedom to protest against wrongdoing. They wanted political parties that could act freely and independently. Political parties should act independently. That's very, very important. Independence. So the aspect of freedom and independence should be reflected in all the aspects of life. Only that can make a democracy to flourish, to flower. Okay, so both countries resorted to large scale of nationalization. We saw in Myanmar, one after the army took over, army nationalized everything. There is nothing called privacy. Same thing happens in Libya. But in the case of Libya, we find something different. Okay, so that nationalization in Libya was profiting the people. In case of Myanmar, that became an oppression. Okay, so this nationalization in both countries put the brake on balanced development. They were also affected by large scale corruption. If everything is nationalized, if there is no private property, what happens? Those who are controlling the government, those who are governing, they can in a way mismanage all the wealth and resources of the country because they control everything. Okay, so people felt helpless and angry, which strengthened their will to protest against the government. Okay, so when people know that something is not okay, then what happens? They go against the government. They began to believe that democracy could provide a solution. So it is during the protest that people come to know that democracy it's only democracy that can prove a kind of strong weapon against these kind of dictators. Okay, so democracy, once again, it is by the people, it is for the people, and it is of the people. It is the people who elect their own leaders. Okay, but but even in democracy, no, like our country, we have so many loopholes. People are bought by money. If money is involved in democracy, then that will be the end of democracy. We should know that. Okay, so in this chapter, we try to understand the struggle for democracy over the past few decades in both Libya and Myanmar. In 20th century, many countries in the world began demanding some form of democratic governance in both countries. Democracy was established in most colonial countries after they gained independence. Okay, like India. Okay, almost many of the Asian countries, they were colonies. But after the independence, what happens? These colonies, they became democratic countries. Wherever democracy failed to take root, the struggle to establish democratic government continues till to this day. Okay, even though after the independence, the democratic government, elected by the people, failed, still in those countries we find that the country is struggling to re-establish the democratic values, re-establish the democracy. Okay, all right. So with that, we complete this lesson. I'm adding 3 more videos so that you can once again go through everything. So I just made a summary of this second part, history of Myanmar. But if you look at the videos that follow, okay, so you'll be able to clearly understand what we really talk about. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.